Well, I apologize a little bit for the break in the action, but we had a few projects at home and I've been busily focused on getting those done. We're at a point where I can start tying a little bit more and getting a few more of these patterns out here. Today's pattern is going to be called the Jack Daniels, a wonderful pattern. It will seem very complicated to tie, but if you kind of follow these instructions, you'll see that it's not all that difficult, really. I've got a size 16 jig hook here in my vise with a copper bead, and that's what you're going to want to go with, is a copper bead on the Jack Daniels. One of the complications here, and it's really not that difficult, so we'll kind of step you through it, is we're going to use two bobbins at the same time. That's just how I prefer to tie this. Really nothing other than a tapered ribbed body with some crystal or some eye stub on it, as well as a little bit of CDC on it, and you'll want to keep your CDC really light, and that's really all there is to it. It's a great pattern, fishes well. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to start with black thread, and I'm just going to use a 14-aught sheer in black, and I'm going to start this right behind the bead, and then I'm just going to move backwards back to the bend of the hook here where I want the abdomen or the body of this fly to start. I'm just going to go about that far, and then we're going to go ahead and reach in and cut off our thread. So I'll just go ahead and continue with our black thread. Got a little stray fragment sticking up there, but that's okay, we'll take care of that. And that's as much as I'm going to do here with the black thread. I'm going to throw in just a couple turn half hitch with my whip finisher, just to keep this thread in place as we start working with the other thread. I really don't want this to slip or come undone, and so just a quick half hitch, just a couple of turns, because we do want this to be tapered. So I don't want to build up too thick of a body. And then I'm just going to hang my black thread over my vise here, and then I'll reach over and I'm going to grab some sort of a beige color of nano silk, and I'm using nano silk both to keep the body tight as well as to give us a little bit of strength here. So we're going to tie our nano silk back a little ways. So now we're tying with the two different bobbins. We'll go ahead and cut our thread off. From here I'm just going to work on that taper. So I'm going to work on taking some, especially back here towards the back, some touching wraps so I'm not building up too much bulk at the very back here. I do want to make sure that that black thread is kind of covered up here, and I'm just going to kind of move up and back until I've got kind of the taper that I'm looking for with this beige color. And the dubbing and the CDC is going to go right behind the bead, so I'm okay if I go up a little bit. This nano silk doesn't tend to leave very much of a footprint at all. So again, I'm just especially covering up the black here at the back end, because we'll be doing some tapering wraps up front, which will cover up that black thread easily for us. So just a slight taper here, not looking for a lot. I'll turn my vise sideways a little bit just so that I can look at that taper and how it's developing. And we're back to that same old process of tapering, so I'm going to take a few wraps backwards here and then a few wraps forward to build it a little bit thicker to behind the bead. Then I'll do that again, but we're going to go a little bit less deep. And then one more pass with that, and we'll be good to move on to our next step. So just a couple wraps here. So with our tapering looking pretty good, I just want to move this beige thread out of the way. I'm just going to hold it back in my material clip here on the other side of the vise. Try not to do what I just did there and get it caught up in the hook point. And I'm going to take my black thread again, And I know sometimes we turn our thread counterclockwise so it'll jump backwards or flatten out. In this case I want to spin it clockwise because I want it to cord up. This black thread is going to become the ribbing on the fly, so I want it nice and tight, corded up. So once I've got that pretty much where I want it, I'm going to go ahead and start taking open wraps with this black thread. You'll see it's just starting to create that nice hint of a ribbing here. I'll just take that right up behind the eye of the hook. Once I've got it there, we're just going to grab our whip finisher. We'll be cutting our thread. We'll be back to just one thread instead of two bobbins at the same time. And we'll just cut that right off. And with our beige thread still kind of held back, and before doing that kind of collar on here, we're going to spice it up a little bit and put a little bit of the lightest coat of UV resin on here. My thread decided to give way here. Just make sure you've got this covered on all sides. And if you've got too much, we'll just circle back and we'll take some of that off. Looks like we've got it fairly well covered here. I'll just thread my bodkin kind of over that a little bit. I want it coated, but I'm not really interested in a great big thick coat. That will make this pop a little bit more. It'll also make it a little bit more durable. We'll hit it with our UV. So with our beige thread right up here, right behind the bead, I'm going to take a dubbing twister here. We're going to go ahead and connect our, so a nice rotating one too, and create ourselves a little dubbing loop. Just take that over the top and spin it around the base a couple of times to secure it. And I'll just take a wrap or two behind the bead to kind of hold that in place. So I'm going to start out on one side of my dubbing loop with this black UV dub, ice dub. And we're really not going to put much on there. With our macro lens on here, it's going to look like a lot more, but we're only talking about an inch or even maybe even less than an inch. And I'm going to go ahead and slide that on up here. So on this other side, we're just going to use some medium gray done CDC. I've already selected a feather. I've got it secured in my material clip. Go ahead and cut that as close to the stem as I possibly can. And again, I don't want very much. You can see I've got maybe an inch or 3/4 of an inch. I want to place that right in between that black dubbing. I'll open it up. So I've got dubbing on one half, I've got CDC on the other half. Then we're going to just go ahead and spin this up. And you can see that that CDC is pretty sparse. From there, we're going to just start building our collar just by taking some touching turns here behind that copper bead. And as we tie it in, we're going to want to stroke as much of that CDC back as we possibly can. And once I've got that kind of tied in, we'll just go ahead and tie off our dubbing loop, move our bobbin cradle out of the way. We'll deal with a couple of those errant CDC fibers here in a second. But I just want to secure my dubbing loop here, right behind the bead. I'll just go ahead and turn my vise, and we'll go ahead and remove our beige kind of tan thread here. I'm going to stroke some of that CDC backwards and take a few wraps just to try to prevent any of this from sticking over the bead. So you can kind of see what we've got going there. And once I get that far, I'm just going to give myself just a tiny little bit of extra thread. We're going to go ahead and whip finish and cut our thread off. With that, I'm going to do just a little bit of grooming. I want this even a little bit lighter because I want that body to be paramount here. So I just kind of pinch and pull. Sometimes I'll use my tweezers, but sometimes my tweezers have a hard time grabbing hold of this stuff. And so there you have it. The Jack Daniels pattern, great pattern, really not that difficult to tie if you just kind of follow these instructions. You know, a couple of things that are unheard of when I began starting my fly tying adventure some 30 years ago was using 2 bobbins at the same time. That was completely foreign to me 30 years ago. Also, using a dubbing loop and putting 2 materials on either side and combining them together makes for just a wonderful head here. So great pattern to use. The CDC just gives a tiny little bit of movement. So you don't want to overdo it with the CDC, you just want it so you have some movement in the water, and the CDC does a great job of that without completely overwhelming the body of our tan thread with the black ribbing. So grab yourself a hook, throw it in the vise, and give this one a shot.